Yeah. So we're starting now.
Okay, fine. So I was born and bred in the UK in London. I grew up there, where my family's from. I've been there for a while. And I grew up in a religious family, modern Orthodox, and went to Jewish elementary school and high school in the UK. Um, and the schools that I went to, they were religious, but the majority of my friends were not religious at all. And I also, from kind of where I lived, the general area I lived in, a large portion of my friends also weren't Jewish. And I had a great time growing up with them and hanging out with them. But I was always very aware of my own Jewish identity and my own family's practices. Um, and since I was about, I would say 15, 16, I had this urging me to become a teacher. It's why I felt that I was good at um, engaging other people and really kind of whatever subject. It wasn't necessarily Judaism or any Jewish topics, but just generally being a teacher is kind of what I got my buzz from and what I really, really enjoyed doing. And ever since then, I kind of went on and pursued that. So in school, I was interested in psychology, I was interested in English, I was interested also in Judaic studies, philosophy, and ethics, and kind of went down that path. Then when I finished school, I took some time out to come to Israel for a couple of years, where I traveled around the country, meeting different people, going on hikes, living on kibbutz for a bit, and also spent time studying in an Israeli yeshiva, a place where people go and study ancient Jewish texts and engage with all the ancient dilemmas that Jews have grappled with over the millennia. And that was based in the old city of Jerusalem. So I was living a stone's throw away from the Kotel, the Western Wall. And I spent about a year there studying. Again, just for me, it was about personal growth and just discovering what my heritage was. Then after I left school, came back to the UK, went to university as people usually do. And in university, I studied educational philosophy, kind of carrying on with that whole path of becoming an educator, um, and became a qualified teacher and started teaching in a high school in London, a Jewish high school, and I also taught in a public school, or in the UK called that a comprehensive, and also working as a youth director for the community that I lived in. And it's kind of what I felt like I was born to do. Whatever it is, I don't feel like I'm any better than any other educator, but where I feel at home, where I feel at peace, is in the classroom, engaging with adults, young people, in any topic. It just happened to be that the topic that I was quote unquote most knowledgeable about happened to be various different areas in Judaism. And as part of my training as a teacher, I then decided to then become a rabbi. I thought it was kind of the next step up for me to engage with the content at a deeper level, and also to progress professionally. The next step up for me was to become a rabbi. I did that. Then, after a while, after a few years, I moved with my family to Israel, where we live in Mosvien. And I carried on, I stayed involved in education. I worked in developing materials for schools around the world. And with Israel as one of the high tech centers of the world, I worked in developing virtual reality and augmented reality materials for schools around the world. That kind of it focused on texts from the Bible and how we can use those technologies to help young people and students engage with those texts. And after doing that for a while, I missed that interaction I had when I was in the UK with other human beings, being in a
Okay.
classroom and teaching people. Like, it was nice sitting in an office and 9 to 5 and writing, but I missed that energy, that buzz, that adrenaline that I got from teaching. And so I then was approached to become the rabbi of Young Judea Israel. Young Judea is the largest American youth movement. It also has a chapter in Israel and runs one of the largest gap year programs, and it also runs post grad programs. And so I now, for the last year or so, I've been working for them helping them develop programs, teaching, running trips, running events for all the people that come on their programs. And that's where we are today.
Well, great. Sounds like a journey. Yeah, so and where then did your interest in making cocktails grow?
Okay, so I mean, I'm not sure if it was partly because I was just brought up in England and part of the culture, there's like a drinking culture there. I think that's part of it. I've always kind of been, from a young age, from my father. I don't remember what age, when I was maybe 14 years old, he took me on my first bar crawl in the UK. We went
When you
to
were how old?
So we went to Southend, which is like is in East London, and he wanted to kind of, I don't know, integrate me in this, drinking culture, and we'd go from bar to bar to bar, seeing me, a 14-year-old. I looked maybe older than 14, to see how many places I could get served in and not be turned away.
Okay.
We were quite successful. I think I ended up getting like a drink, I don't know, half a pint or something in about 3 places that we went to. So that was like the kind of drinking thing. And then when I was in university, there are different, like with any universities, you can join societies at the beginning of the semester. You go to a society fair. There's maths society, an English society, a Jewish society, an Israel society, a Palestinian society, and all societies under the sun. So I signed up for a few, and I saw in the corner of my eye a cocktail society. Now, again, just to preface something, that each society has a shortened name. So, as I said, Jewish society is JSOC, Israel society is usually ISOC, English society is INGSOC. Cocktail society has the unfortunate or fortunate name, depending on how you look at it, called CockSoc, which I also found rather humorous. I know it's not so rabbinic, but I still found it very, very humorous. And I thought that this would be a great society to join. And we'd meet, once in a while, every couple of weeks, and we'd try and experiment making different cocktails, different ingredients, vodka-based, scotch-based, bourbon-based. And each week we'd experiment with different things. And that's where kind of my interest in cocktails kind of grew from there. And then when I started working in school, a colleague and myself, we would host once a year cocktail parties in school after the students had left, and we'd go to the supermarket and buy all the different ingredients. And every year we would have our cocktail parties, and kind of just it grew from there. So when we met on Purim, I thought I'd bring that passion marry that passion of cocktail making and Judaism into a Purim cocktail party, and just experiment with a few recipes that I'd worked on before.
Yeah, to explain for people who haven't been there, we met basically in when you visited us in Haifa, the Young Judea group that was in Haifa, and you came to us with a lot of different ingredients to make all kinds of different cocktails, and it was on Purim. And
yeah, exactly. And the thing for me as well is that when you hear the word cocktail, obviously it comes with this prestige, and maybe if you want to go to a cocktail bar or a cocktail making experience, it can be very expensive and daunting. And for me, I just wanted to show, part of it anyway, you could just go to your local supermarket and buy some ingredients, a bunch of fruits, maybe some vodka, some milk, some coffee liquor, some ice, whatever, a few leaves. And with those ingredients on a pretty tight budget, you can make, hopefully, with the right instructions and guidance, some interesting and tasty cocktails. It doesn't have to be something which is just for, expensive night outs.
Yeah, well, and now I'm currently working at the bar. Yesterday I had my first night of making cocktails on my own, which is all right, but it is stressful to get everything right.
Yeah, how did it go?
It was all right. Like I started working at the bar around like 1.5 months ago in my city, and it's a pretty big bar. It's like an American style bar that's called Louisiana, in the end of the world of Germany, in Trier, and like I like the job very much. My colleagues are all very nice people, but it's stressful and it's hard work. And before that, I've been so before I started doing cocktails this week, basically, I was only at the beer station and at the soft drink station, so I didn't have to like prepare crazy stuff. But now yesterday I had Sex on the Beach and Gold Digger and Mojito and whatever. And yeah, you have to think fast.
Yeah, I love it. It's the whole. I love the whole piece. It's the names that it's the names of each cocktail and the colors and just the throwing all the different ingredients together. It's kind of like it's like cooking, but not as I don't know. It's not as difficult, not as time consuming, and then you can also just drink alcohol as well. So it's kind of it's best of it. It's best
of all the worlds. Yeah. So this was your approach for us. Still young people, but already kind of grown-ups. That was your approach to show us what Purim is or means. And so, can you give an example how you would approach maybe people who are even older and kids? So did you have like different approaches?
For Purim specifically, or just generally in?
For example, maybe you can have a short explanation of what Purim is anyway.
Yeah, sure, 100%. So I was asked by the head of your program, the Wujs program, to come and run a Purim event. That was my brief. It was the festival of Purim, which it's a festival that takes place once a year in the Jewish calendar, around about February, March time, and it commemorates the Jewish community's persecution in what was then Persia, around 2,000 years ago, when an individual who rose to be the top advisor to the king of Persia, called Haman or Haman, who has the decision to wipe out the Jewish people. It's recorded all in the book of Esther in the Bible. The story goes that he wants to wipe out the Jewish people, and through a series of seemingly coincidental events, the Jewish people are not destroyed. They end up being saved through a hero called Esther, the book, and her uncle Mordecai end up saving the Jews. They kill the man Haman, who wants to kill the Jews, and from then on, as Jewish people do, they celebrate by eating and drinking. So I was given this brief that I needed to come to Wujs and teach them about Purim. So I decided that in order to do that, I would come and talk to them about the story and how it's celebrated in Judaism, but also take an aspect from that festival, which I thought would be quite interesting and exciting and appropriate for that age level, which is drinking alcohol, and bring all those things together. In the story of Purim itself, every key event that takes place throughout the story occurs at some kind of lavish banquet, which is made either by the king or the queen. And at that banquet, the story explains in detail, similar to, like, say, Game of Thrones, for example. If you ever read Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin, whenever there's a meal that takes place in his world, he takes pages and pages and pages to describe what food was served and what drink was served, what was the starter and main course and dessert, and what the hall looks like. Similarly, in the book of Esther, the author of the book also goes to great length to describe what takes place at these parties. And a big aspect of it is this idea of drinking. And the rabbis over the ages and scholars have discussed why that's significant in terms of drinking. And there are various different answers given. Some that it's just kind of to do with excess. Some say that this idea of getting drunk and things getting switched on its head when you do drink is a symbol for the story, in which the beginning of the story, the Jews are going to be destroyed, and everything gets switched on its head when the Jews are saved, and their enemy ends up being destroyed. In any event, very short story, very short story, long story short. I got there in the end. Long story short.
All right.
I decided to to take that piece and kind of bring it to life by doing cocktail making, and whilst we're making the cocktails, to bring it to discuss and talk about the issues of the Purim story. That was my piece for you. For kids, there are different aspects that I could take. For young teenagers, I mean, in a similar vein, I might do mocktail making, because it's also quite cute for them. There's also the aspect for some people who may have heard of the festival before of also dressing up. Because the story itself also involves espionage and different characters wearing different costumes in order to hide who they are, the tradition has come about, but people also dress up on this holiday. And so I've also run a session in which people, I bring plain masks, and people decorate their own masks for the holiday. And within that session, I run a discussion on what it means to wear a mask. That perhaps during the year, we put on masks for different scenarios and situations that we are in, whether with our work colleagues, or we're in school, or with our parents, or with our boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife, wherever it may be. We put on a mask because we want to present ourselves in certain ways. And on the festival of Purim, when we wear a costume, we're also thinking about how do we portray ourselves during the year? What masks, quote unquote, are we wearing? That I would also run for younger people to get them to explore their own personality, their own identity, and how they are around other people. And then if we were to kind of go up the scale and go towards adults, I'd also kind of perhaps combine the two and work on some kind of cocktail party, also exploring identity, how we portray ourselves, how we present ourselves to other people, and tie that in with the story of Purim, which is all about this concept of identity, role reversal, which I think is really, really an interesting topic, especially in this day and age where we're dealing with also social media, where we talk about, well, I'm me, this individual person who sits at home, who has my likes, dislikes, I have my quirks. What do I choose to portray myself on social media? Our portrayal on social media, although it's closely linked to who we are, it's an avatar. It's a way we choose to show what we want to show, where we've been, how we talk, what we say, what we post. They're all a portrayal of ourselves. So I get into that discussion as well, especially with teenagers who are brought up with, grown up with social media, and to be able to differentiate between the real us and the us we choose to portray.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it's again, it's for me anyway, and it's trying to take an ancient story, which for various different reasons is difficult to connect to. Number one, we don't know whether it took place or not. We don't know who wrote it. It's written in an ancient language. Even English translations or German translations or French translations can be inaccurate or could be boring to read. And it's thinking, okay, I am an individual who either is Jewish or not Jewish, who has heard of this story. What can I learn from it? How can I apply it to my everyday life so that hopefully by the end of this hour session, I've engaged with or I've thought about an issue that hopefully will either make me a more thoughtful person, maybe even a better person, maybe just someone who's more aware of my world and how to interact with it.
All right. So, are you doing those kind of events now specifically for Young Judea, or also for others?
So, in general, I run these sessions for Young Judea. I also spend some time I still write lessons and sessions for schools and youth groups in the United Kingdom and the United States, and that's about 5% of my time. But 95%, as you said, is taken up with running those events for Young Judea and the plethora of individuals that come on their programs.
All right. So you mentioned Game of Thrones.
I did.
I have to talk about that, of course. Did you watch the series or read the books?
Yeah, I've read the books and watched the series.
Okay. So you know what's going on.
And yeah, I try to.
Yeah, so how is your take on the religions in Westeros, and how do you think how well they are described by Mr. Martin?
So one of the reasons I'm a huge fan of the books in general is because it's not unique to Game of Thrones, but George R. R. Martin uses issues and beliefs and feelings and emotions to influence his characters. Real life emotions, real life feelings, real life beliefs, or some that mimic real life beliefs, to hugely influence his world. So if any student of history will know how, for example, and within Christianity, Protestantism or Catholicism or Judaism or Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism has been used throughout history as a tool for controlling the actions and thoughts of human beings. And within Game of Thrones, that's also very true. Although the religions themselves are fictional, they kind of mimic types of religions that we are familiar with. So I like how kind of the the Lord of Light, the one God, perhaps is similar to monotheistic religions with its belief of like a light bringer of Messiah that's going to come and save the world and destroy evil, and everyone kind of waits for that day and puts their faith in that, even if it means burning people alive. And I also like this kind of this innate hate for any other faith, for any other religion, and the intolerance that George R. R. Martin presents, and again how that's reflected in our real world. So if you're a follower of the Seven, then the Lord of Light is seen as evil and despicable, even though their own religion also has its own issues and what it teaches to other people. And so, look, me as the reader, I know I've got friends who kind of they're very happy to kind of say that if they were in the world, they would be a follower of the Lord of the Light, they would be a follower of the Seven, they would be a follower of the darkness, whatever.
Okay.
I'm like a fan of just the interplay of how he presents these religions and how they interplay with each other, and how at the end of the day, none of it really matters. Everyone has their beliefs, and in the world, each has its power, which different sorcerers and witches can use. But at the end of the day, it's just the tool used by those in charge to control their underlings. So I like how he kind of sets that up.
So what does that tell us about our real world religions and our conflicts within and within them and throughout history?
I look at that. There's a definite commentary there that within Game of Thrones, the beliefs themselves for the individual are that they have a noble purpose, and they give people meaning and direction in their lives on an individual level. What happens is, and what has happened and what is happening today, is when people in a position of power then take those belief systems and use the control that they have over individuals for their own way to gain power. And that's what happens today. I'm a big fan of personal belief choices. The reason that I am, for example, Jewish, partly I grew up as Jewish, I was religious, but like in the world of Game of Thrones, the religions themselves were, one believes, set up for moral, good, noble purposes. And each individual chooses to believe what they believe. But what happens in the world of Game of Thrones, and again it mirrors what has happened and what is happening in today's world, is that the individuals and groups who are in a position of power use those religions, use those faiths as a way to manipulate and control people and cement their position in power, resulting in suffering, death, war, conflict. Now the question is, from my perspective, is what then is the cause of that suffering? Is it the belief systems themselves? Perhaps. Is it the texts that have been written and attributed to those faiths? Very much so. Is it the individuals who then come to interpret those texts and come to preach those texts and manipulate and control people? Almost always, almost definitely. And it's almost a combination of those different things. So from my perspective, obviously I'm a rabbi, I'm a Jewish rabbi, and I have my own take on why I choose to belong and do belong to the Jewish faith and have my own certain sets of beliefs that gives me direction and purpose. But once then that kind of crosses the border on, now we look at other people lower and different to us, or because we are of a faith, we therefore need to make sure everyone believes the same thing as us, and I am by default right and they are by default wrong. That's when, for me, I actively try and fight against. I see myself as a rabbi, as a position of someone who has spent time studying the religion of Judaism and other religions as well, as someone who needs to have a voice and say that no, we have beliefs. Every human being has some kind of belief system. This is my belief system, and for me, it works well for me and for individuals who want to live a better life and a life of meaning and a life of purpose. However, once it then crosses a boundary into control, that's where I feel like it's my responsibility to take a stand.
All right. So can you tell me like more closely to what strain of Judaism you actually belong to, and how that what kind of rabbi you are in that regard, because as like there are different kind of Judaisms and well different kind of rabbis.
Of course. So I trained as a modern Orthodox rabbi. And what that means is that I learnt the traditional texts of the Bible, the Tanakh, the Gemara, the Talmud, and the commentaries that spanned up until from 2,000 years ago until today, with the core kind of underpinning focus on how that applies in our world today. The focus being on the modern, how those should then help the modern world progress. So my own personal beliefs are very much kind of, if it was like talking about left wing, right wing, extreme, etc., I place myself very much on the left. So I place myself kind of either termed open orthodoxy, perhaps very similar to conservative Judaism, in which Judaism is a set of beliefs, it's a text, it's also a nation, it's also a race, and those texts are here for us to interpret, to use in order to better the world, and that's where I place myself.
Okay, so how does that reflect your everyday life then? Like, of course, your job at Young Judea and showing people, bringing them closer to the stories in Judaism. But how do you think your everyday life is different from another person?
So I follow as best as I can the rules of living a Jewish life. So what that means is that I eat kashrut. I only eat kosher foods. Once a week, I observe the Sabbath. I pray 3 times a day, and that's kind of that's how, let's say, it would differentiate me in my own personal practice with someone who, let's say, either isn't an observant Jew or isn't Jewish at all. And then within those, my mission is to give purpose and meaning to those things. They never become just by rote and automatic. So, for example, when I pray 3 times a day, I dedicate those 3 spaces of time to meditate and focus on something that I can improve within myself. So in the morning, I take that time in the morning to pray. And for me, it's a moment of meditation, of mindfulness, to try and figure out, okay, where am I? What am I doing today? What are my goals for the day? And that's it. And then I move on. Okay, same thing in the afternoon with the perspective of what have I achieved so far today? How can I carry on going? And in the evening, reflecting and taking stock of what I've achieved that day. Same thing with kashrut, keeping kosher. For me, it's obviously a series of things you can and can't eat, but it's also about order and control and taking stock of what I'm eating, why I'm eating it. I guess a whole other conversation of my journey as well. This is like a personal thing of me on the journey of becoming a vegetarian and a vegan, which is something slightly different, and it's like kind of a side point. But it's like part of that whole process of food for me is not just about sustenance, energy, whatever. It's also about being conscious of what I'm putting in my mouth and putting in my body.
Okay. So so then how do you how do you work with the texts in the Torah, and how do you interpret them as a modern rabbi in the 21st century? How do you work with a text that is more than 2,000 years old and see yourself surrounded by 21st century technology and lifestyle, and how do you try to live within those worlds?
Okay, so as you said, the Jewish texts date back thousands of years, and obviously within those texts are going to find ideas and verses and sources that are very, what we would say, unmodern, or a better word is archaic. Whether it's views on women, whether it's views on homosexuality, whether it's views on the treatment of
Slaves.
People from another faith, for example.
Huh?
My journey of studying ancient Jewish texts throughout the generations, I've found that throughout those times, individuals have grappled with those complexities, obviously at various different levels, but within the framework, within the prism of the issues that were going on at the day, and have been able to find interpretations and compromises in order to apply those to modern times. I don't really see how our time is any different. Unfortunately, like with many other religions and institutions, there are individuals who are at the top who control what's interpreted, what can be changed, or what can't be changed. For example, in Israel, the rabbinate is controlled by ultra-Orthodox Jews, who their practices, their beliefs, I disagree with on almost every level. I feel like it's part of my own belief system, it's my responsibility to speak out and to say, this is not what I believe, this is not how I believe the Torah should be, the Jewish text should be interpreted. Like with anything, any text, the Torah, the Talmud is up for interpretation. Whether or not you believe it's from God, even if you believe it's something which is written by God, the text itself says that the Torah is now for humankind to go and interpret to use. It's no longer in heaven.
Is there
Yes.
excuse me, is there a certain passage that says exactly that you have to, that the text is not basically written in stone, but it is to be interpreted?
Yes, there's a passage in the Talmud. It's in a tractate, a section called Kiddushin. It's like there's 39 tractates. But in Kiddushin, there's a story that's presented in which there are rabbis who are discussing whether or not a certain oven can be used. Whether it's a trivial story, whether or not this oven can be used. There's one rabbi who believes that it shouldn't be used, and he uses all of these miracles from God to prove that he is right. And against him are a group of rabbis who say that it should be allowed to be used. the conclusion of the story, the last line, is that even though this rabbi is bringing various different miracles from God, we don't listen to his opinion, because the Torah, the law, is no longer in the realms of heaven, it's in the realms of men. The phrase used is, in the Aramaic, lo b'shamayim he, it's no longer in heaven, meaning that when it's now a part of the world. And now the Torah, obviously we need to try and stay true to the text, to the essence of the text, but when we get to an issue which is morality, human morality, ethical issues versus a piece of text, there needs to be some kind of debate, some kind of malleability, so that we are able to make this world generally a better place for everyone to live. That's my own personal take. Obviously, there are people who disagree with me. There are people on the right and on the left who will say different. But my understanding, and this is not only my interpretation, it's the interpretation of many, many people, many different rabbis and scholars, etc., across the Jewish spectrum, is that for us, we need to be, this is now for human beings. It's for us to interpret it's no longer in heaven.
All right. So how often do you have like discussions like that with other rabbis? Do you like meet on a nice sunny day and talk about the Torah on the porch?
So now, I mean, I find myself now living in a I kind of, it's less as idyllic as that, like sitting around in like a nice, like a group.
Yeah.
But usually in different Facebook groups and WhatsApp groups, and when I meet up with friends, we have these types of discussions. It's everything for me, unfortunately and fortunately, is becoming more and more online. And again, I see that as a positive, because you're able to hear a broader range of voices from around the world, with people from all different walks of life, to be able to share their own opinions and thoughts.
Okay, so can you maybe try to describe what would be another strain of Judaism, and how it would be different for a rabbi of that strain, to how he would describe Judaism to me?
Yeah, of course. So I'll take you through briefly just some of the main kind of denominations.
Mm-hmm.
So you have ultra-Orthodoxy. Ultra-Orthodoxy take the words of the Bible and commentaries in the Talmud as literally true.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what that means is that they believe that the world is 5,778 years old. They believe that homosexuality is a grave sin. They believe that if someone were to break the Sabbath, then in an ideal world, they should get the death penalty. They also believe that the final say lies with and rests on the shoulders of appointed rabbis. And that's with any book of life. So that means that if a rabbi who is appointed in a certain position says that mobile telephones or the internet is forbidden, then that's it. It's as if God has said it, and you can't use that. You can't use that technology. You can't integrate with that forum or that individual anymore. They're very, you call it fundamentalist, you call it extreme. That's ultra-Orthodox Judaism, also known as Haredi Judaism. Also realms of Hasidic Jews also put themselves inside that camp. Then you have, again, it's a spectrum. So within that, I mentioned modern Orthodox Jews. You also then have conservative Jews, who are very, very similar to what I described. And within that, their level of practice might range. So you might have people who are conservative Jews who might say, I believe Judaism is a great religion. However, for me, keeping kosher is not for me. You then have Reform Judaism, which came about as a way to also almost integrate into wider society. So their kind of reason for existing is that Judaism was a shrinking religion, and they felt like the way that Judaism should be saved is adopting beliefs and practices that are very similar to the countries that they are living in at the moment. Their services, for example, mimic and mirror services that take place within a church. So the use of an organ, the types of ceremonies that they perform, and tunes that they use are similar-ish to things that you would find in a church, for example. You then have progressive and renewal Judaism, in which the focus of being a Jew is tikkun olam, to heal and fix the world. So rather than a set of rules and practices that go back thousands of years, it's a renewal of Judaism in which the sole focus should be, how can we make the world a better place? And so, look, my own personal outlook is it's like a kind of a hodgepodge, a mixture of some of those beliefs, and then people place themselves on that spectrum of kind of all the way, let's say, to the right of ultra-orthodoxy, all the way to either non-affiliated or renewal Judaism or progressive Judaism, in which the focus should only be on fixing the world and not at all on any form of practice.
Okay, so there's, well, a lot of different strains. And so how did they... What already this tell us about like Judaism? There's like so many interpretations and so many ways to live Judaism in the world, and so how do you think about what that means for you and for your interpretation?
But I believe every single person should be allowed, should be able to choose and interpret religion specifically, but in general, anything the way that they choose, and be able to practice that freely, as long as obviously they're not harming other people. So for me, I was born a Jew, I was raised a Jew, and I managed, thankfully, to find meaning and purpose within Judaism. However, I feel like it's my right as a human being to be able to choose and interpret and express that belief as best as possible. And anyone else should also be able to choose and interpret that. I also don't believe that it then weakens or dilutes the meaning of any stream of Judaism. If anything, it enriches it. As a human race, we are hopefully, we are a cultured and we are a developed race. We are a developed group of animals. Why? Because of the range of our beliefs. We're not Autobots. We're not just one. We look one way. We don't think one way. We don't speak one way. We are varied. We are different. We are diverse. And I think that diversity is what makes us special. It makes us obviously unique. But it's what brings character and color to life. The same thing with Judaism. I feel like these range of beliefs and interpretations and ways that we can use this religion under the umbrella of Judaism and everything that comes under to I don't think it dilutes it, it enriches it and makes it something more interesting, more diverse, more exciting.
All right, but like the diversity that we see is when I look at it, it's like really hard for me to see how many of those there are in general, and how they basically work with what Judaism is, because the question then becomes if there are many interpretations when it comes to something as meaningful as faith, as it is for many people, and when we take it as serious as saying yes, this text is coming from the heavens and has to be here in this world of humans, then there must be a right way to understand it and live with it and have a right way. So how hard is it to how do I put this question correctly? How does that work then? If you see that there is so much diversity, while there must be one right way.
I would say like this, that unlike okay, I'll try, that's the wrong example. Because for me, and for many people, religion is something in which gives meaning and purpose to someone's life. If a belief system doesn't fill your life with meaning, doesn't give you purpose, doesn't give you direction, doesn't bring you happiness, doesn't bring you closer to other people, then for me, that's when you know for you individually, it's not the right thing. I also am very much against equating faith or religion with science. Science is about facts, things that are right, things that are wrong, and obviously within that, as we develop our skills to be able to test different theories and hypotheses, we are able to hone in on what is factually correct and what's factually correct and incorrect in science. Religion, on the other hand, and faith, or any belief system, belief in anything, is about me, number one, as an individual. Does this give me some kind of structure and meaning and purpose in this ultimately random and meaningless universe? If this doesn't give me meaning and purpose, then it's not right for me. It could be right for someone else. If it doesn't make me happy and fulfilled and content, if it doesn't do that, then for me as an individual, it's not right. When we go look at the broader pictures you were saying of, if then there are so many different interpretations and ways of viewing even, let's say, Judaism, then how can one say Judaism is right? You are correct. Judaism and my way of interpreting Judaism is not right for many people, billions of people. It is right for me. Why? Because as I do every day, I meditate and I try and think about, is this where I want to be going? Is this the path that I want to be on? If the answer at any point is no, I stop and I just adjust myself, try and get myself in the right direction. However, for someone else it might not be, and then that individual should find their own unique path. So that's how I hope that kind of answers your question. I know it's not like it's the best answer, because ultimately other people rightfully turn around and say, well, if there's more than one answer, it must mean that this whole entity of Judaism is wrong. But I like to try and just to do things in groups, compartmentalize and say, well, I leave that way of thinking for things that are provable and observable. Science. But when it comes to the way I feel and the way that I choose to interpret my own existence, that for me can only be something which evolves and grows over time with the way that I view my world. And that ultimately there can't be a right reason. And I never turn around and say that my way is better than anyone else. It's better for me. It might not be for anyone else.
Okay, so but is there then one God for you, but the way you communicate with this entity, or how you live in a world where this entity exists, is just individual?
Yeah, I would say it's individual. I may have the belief that there is a God that exists, or a power that brought the universe into being, and that perhaps that being gave some kind of meaning and purpose or direction to the universe. However, I also believe that entity has given every individual free will and free choice to decide which direction they want to take their lives in. I don't see anyone. I don't think that anyone's individual decision or choice of how they choose to believe or not to believe or do or not to do, again, it doesn't harm other individuals, is any better or any worse than what I choose to believe. And again, I'm also a, however much I don't like to admit it, I'm also a result of my environment. And if I were not born Jewish, would I end up being Jewish? Probably not. But I was. And I tried as best as I can to delve into that path, to question, to poke, and to provoke. That's important. To provoke, to poke, and to see where that takes me. And I've found that does give me purpose, it does give me meaning. It could have been that when I would have gone on a different path. But that, just because I believe that a God exists, it doesn't mean that I think that everyone then should recognize that God exists, or recognize that that I am part of religion, and therefore everyone should therefore choose that religion. People should choose what they want to believe, and I also believe that that's what this supreme being, this entity, is fine and okay with.
So, what is your personal relationship with that higher entity?
I struggle with that every single day. I find it hard to conceptualize it. I find it hard to justify it on a minute by minute basis. My relationship is a difficult one. It goes backwards and forwards. It has ups, it has downs. Sometimes, and that also depends on what situation I'm in and what's going on in my life, how I'm feeling, and how much sleep I've had, whatever's going on in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I get angry with that entity. I am sometimes thankful. I'm sometimes sad. I'm sometimes in disgust with things that go on in the world. Whether or not God chooses to let people do what they do is also a big issue that I struggle with. But I have yet to say that entity or that God does not exist at all.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Well, it sounds like the relationship that you describe is basically, sounds to me like a relationship with basically another person, let's say, because let's say we all have, well, not let's say, we all have mothers. And we all have different relationship with our mothers, but my sister has another relationship with my mother, as my other sister has also another relationship with my mother, as my father has another relationship with my father, and all kinds of different people have a different relationship with my mother. Why am I talking about my mother? I don't know, but
I see. Sorry to interrupt. I see what you're saying.
Okay.
That's
do I understand it correctly? More or
yes,
less.
I think so.
We both don't know.
Pardon?
We both don't know. In the
no,
end.
I think so. They're like this. You're right, and I have my own personal relationship with that being.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, though, for me, I'm not. There are individuals who the thing that kind of gets them going in the morning and really drives them up is to be able to grapple with whether or not they believe in God, or whether or not they believe God is good, etc., etc., etc. For me, I believe that there is some kind of being there. Call it God, call it whatever you want, and I have some kind of relationship with that God. But for me, I find it, just for me, wasted breath and wasted energy to wrestle constantly with that issue. I wrestle with it, but to constantly do it, I prefer just to be living in the moment, in this world, and thinking about how I could be a better person. I exist. Okay, I think, therefore I am.
Mm-hmm.
I exist. Now what do I do with that? Do I sit and ponder all day to these huge questions? Sometimes I do. Sometimes I just want to go out into the world and make a difference.
That's all right. Sounds good. But so how do you then Can you talk a little bit more? Like, we talked about how you interpret God, but how is God then described in the Torah, and how the struggle of the people in the stories with God defined your viewing of God?
So I actually like to believe, interestingly enough, that if you look at the stories in the Bible, across the board, the individuals depicted there and written about there all had their issues with God. Whether they believed in God, whether they thought God was going to be there for them or help them, whether they even understood why God did something or didn't do something. For example, Jacob, one of the forefathers, one of the first individuals to be mentioned in the Bible who has this relationship with God. His name is changed to the name Yisrael, which literally means wrestles with God. But Jacob had various different issues growing up. He had a father who didn't love him. He had to run away from home because he had a brother that wanted to kill him. And it wasn't like, everything was hunky-dory. He was happy with everything that was going on in his life. And he confronts, in the story of the Bible, an angel who he wrestles with. Many people interpret that to be that Jacob himself was wrestling with his belief in God to do with a situation in his life. Fast forward to Moses. Moses has multiple disagreements with God's decisions and God's actions. He challenges God on a number of occasions because God wants to destroy the people of Israel, the children of Israel, and Moses disagrees with him by saying that's a ridiculous thing to do. But then a person to come and say that, we should therefore picture God as this super righteous, always makes the right decision, and it's wrong for us to question. It's wrong for us to wrestle with this belief. I don't really buy it. I like to look at the situations in which these individuals, these characters in the Torah itself, have issues with the things that God does, have issues with their own beliefs, and almost take inspiration from that. Whether or not these stories took place is a different issue, but I take inspiration from the story of nothing is as clear cut as we make it seem, as we like to make it, as we like to think.
Mm-hmm. Well, now I lost my train of thought.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. No, I wanted to ask something else. No. Something God. Some question about God. Yes. Okay. So then do you have the look on God basically as a because when people talk about God, they have this image of this being that is, how you said, always right, knows always the right thing, and you don't like basically don't wrestle with this entity because this entity is smarter than you anyway. But then you say that we have to wrestle with this being in a way in our head because, well, do we have to? No, wait. What's the question? The question is.
I think that what keeps me going is the idea that I'm able to wrestle with it. If it was something that I just had to accept, that God is this perfect being, that every decision that's made is completely righteous and correct, I don't think that's possible, and I find it difficult for someone to explain why it would be so. Where people deal with issues like, for example, if we're studying the Holocaust, for example, or genocides that take place today, any issues that we have in our world today, whether they're man-made or not, if one were to not wrestle with, if one were to claim they have some kind of belief and say that they they don't wrestle with that belief, then like I personally would find it very difficult to tackle it, to not have to struggle with it.
Mm-hmm.
I see it as a struggle, but something which again gives my life meaning, it gives my life purpose, it gives my life direction to be able to confront those types of questions. And again, I think also, particularly in this day and age, the last 15, 20 years or so, when we're getting more used to an exposure to the imperfect nature of everything and everyone, I think it makes sense that 500 years ago, 200 years ago, people used to view their leaders, used to view kings and queens and people in authority as these perfect individuals. You couldn't bring them down. Even if we're talking 70 years ago, 50 years ago, we're talking about prime ministers and presidents who are infallible. Now, with the way that, because of the freedom of information, because of the internet, because of the celebrities and individuals post who they are on Twitter and on Instagram and whatever, we see that everyone is human, and that in itself has also humanized God, because we would always equate God with this perfect king or this perfect individual. Now that we've begun to see that individuals who are in power are just as imperfect as us, it then brings down how also we see God and how I see God. It doesn't make us bad. It doesn't make us flaky or indecisive to say, do you know what? Nothing out there is perfect. No one out there is infallible. If we can open up that dialogue and say anything can be brought down and humanized, I think that's positive for us.
Mm-hmm. No, that sounds like like an interesting way of how looking at leaders has like led us to now, basically not thinking that the emperor as a god emperor who can't go wrong and who can't do wrong, and it's basically those things that we should have learned throughout history but still haven't figured out quite, because there's still like a huge demand of, sadly, a lot of people to have a strong leader who knows where to go, how to do it, and how to live our lives. And basically this creating this godlike image of a person who we can follow. And it sounds like you want to go away from that.
Yeah, I think so. It's that balance between also individual freedom and how much we give over to something else, and how much agency we give ourselves. So we used to put a lot of faith. That's right. We used to put a lot of faith in our leaders to provide the things that we need provided. But I think, as you said, as that veil falls, almost like the emperor's new clothes, we begin to see people as just these people who make mistakes, who we can't always trust. It can empower us to say, okay, I need to take more action. I need to take more control of my own life. And I think that should be the same. That's true with those that believe in God as well. It's okay. So we believe that this universe, there was some driving power that brought this universe into being. That doesn't stop me from making important decisions and taking care of myself, and not just relying and sitting back and saying, oh, everything's going to be okay because there's a higher power that's going to look after me. And I think those two, that comparison between us and our leaders and us and God, they kind of run parallel, they run side to side with each other. Once one goes, the other also goes as well. I think that's for the positive, for the best.
Mm-hmm. It sounds also like, do you know the song from, what's her name, Joanne Osborne, One of Us?
Yes, what if God was one of us?
Yeah, exactly. So it really, like, it sounds a little bit as if you know this song quite well.
Yeah, but it's that this I want to be an advocate for, as we all want to be, for choice, for freedom, and also for responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
That we should stand up and take ownership of our actions, for our choices, and not throw that on to anyone else or anything else.
Mm-hmm. So I thought about like if God were to like come to Earth basically in a humanoid form and tell us that that person is God. What would it take for you basically to believe that? If something came from somewhere and said it's God, and basically let's say there's a being, there's an alien. Let's say there's an alien and it's 10 times smarter than us, 10 times bigger than us, 10 times, so it's like 10 times the human can do. And 10 times what the human can do is a lot, right? So basically this being could make us think that that being is God while not being God. So my problem is that if there is at one point a revelation, how would we know that it is the true revelation? It was a I don't know, it was a thought that I had like years ago, and I have that thought every couple of months, and I think about like if there are beings of higher power, it doesn't have to be that it is God, and to basically even know what God is and what God is not would be impossible for us because we are only human beings.
I think, look, the question, I think itself, the question stands on its own legs. I think you're right. That number one, anyone or anything that takes away your agency, that takes away your freedom, that takes away your ability to question or to second guess, for me, that's where you're crossing a line. Number two, I think that's part and parcel of being a human being with the ability to think and to question and to think and to question and to, what's the word I'm looking for? I'll try that again. As part of, we're a human being because we can think and we can question everything around us. If an individual or a being comes and says that I am God and I can prove that by doing X, Y, and Z, okay, great.
Yeah.
But ultimately, for me, as I said before, that's also kind of comes back to, for me, it's not for me this whole time of wrestling with this question 24/7 every second of the day, because for me, it's ultimately, I live in this world, I exist in this world. Now, what do I do about it? And that question will still stand if a being appears and says, I am God and I can prove it by doing X, Y, and Z. Fantastic, you can prove it, that's great.
But I still have to live my life.
Sorry?
But I still have to live my life.
Yeah, I still have to live my life. That doesn't change. If my ability to question is taken away, then for me that's not a path that I'm going to want to follow. If I have to, then obviously we enter the matrix and we're stuck.
Yeah.
And we'll live as slaves. But there's not much I can do about that, unfortunately.
Yeah. That's my problem with God. That's my problem with God. I don't know if I can say it like this, but basically, yeah, it's like if there is a God, if there might be a God, there seems to be for us we have just no tools to understand what that might be. So basically, I'm an atheist because I just don't believe that this kind of being exists, but also I have the feeling that even if this being exists, our way of communicating with that entity is cannot, however perfect that entity is, our imperfection makes it impossible for us to to understand what it means for us.
I completely understand, and I've been in that same place, your thought process, and so for me that's why almost I try to tackle that issue of, okay, so how can I in my mind, if there were to be a God, how can I conceptualize it? Where does that come from? Am I more comfortable believing that everything, the universe is completely random and meaningless? Perhaps. I've been there. I still wrestle with that today. I also wrestle with the issue that there seems to be an order within the universe that points towards there being some kind of entity or being that brought everything into existence. But what kind of keeps me going day in, day out, that keeps the wheels turning, is not what the nature of that being is, but more to do with, as I said before, I'm here, I exist. There's nothing I can really do about that. I mean, there are, but I'm not going to. I exist and I'm here. So now what's next? And there are people who choose the path of, so therefore I exist, and therefore I'm going to continue wrestling with this idea. And there are some that say, they put their hands up and say that I'm never going to be on that realm, in that place where I'm content with any answer. So I'll deal with the issues. I'll continue to tackle those issues, but that's just going to take up part of. It's not going to control my whole reason and being and my whole mind. That's going to be placed right here on the side in the little corner. And there are going to be other faculties that I'm using to move forward and to make meaning and to make purpose for my existence.
Mm-hmm. Well, all right. Maybe just a little thing at last, because I think you don't have much more time left.
Yes, I'm loving this. I could do this all day.
Yeah, thank you.
I need to go on to my next thing.
Okay, so do you have like 10 more minutes, or?
Can we make it 5?
We can make it 5. Okay. Okay, then maybe let's not do what I wanted to do, because this would open Pandora's box too much. So then maybe can you go through the process again of like your youth and how your struggle with with your beliefs has brought you to where you are? And I mean, you did move from England to Israel, and so there is some kind of thought process that led you here, not just staying in in Britain.
Yeah. Okay. So growing up in the UK, in like a fairly small Jewish community, you're provided the tools and the arguments growing up as like a young kid of, this is why you're Jewish, this is why we believe in God, and this is what if someone says X, then you say Y, and this is how we meld and mold together belief in the Bible and science and whatever. And I was kind of brought up on that synthesis of science and religion and trying to find compromise between the two. And I was pretty happy with that. And as I was going along, when I became, as I became a teenager, and as a teenager usually does, began to question and probe and think of whether this was for me or not. And what kind of opened my mind, I suppose, was when I was, about 18, 19, and I began to move away from the study solely of Judaism and began into my early 20s and mid 20s of studying other religions and other faiths extensively, and also many kind of atheist thinkers as well, like obviously I started with Darwinism, but then also to Hitchens and to his name escapes me. This is really, really bad. I'll start again.
I really like Hitchens.
Dawkins. That's it, Dawkins.
Yeah.
Richard Dawkins and the Hitchens, and explored those thinkers as well, because I was tired of living in a ghetto of the mind where I was told that this is what you believe and this is where you stay, and you don't read this and you don't read that. I was pretty tired of that, and in my late teens, early 20s, I began to read and explore those things. And as I went on that journey, I began to have an appreciation for the broad spectrum of thinkers that are out there and that were there, they're still writing and still speaking. And as I kind of came to grips with what the arguments they were presenting in terms of the impossibilities for God's existence and the issues with religion, I began forming my own viewpoint, my own world outlook. I took the foundation that I had gained from a Jewish upbringing, but then added within that an appreciation for other cultures, other belief systems, and that's where this kind of, I would say, this individualistic outlook came from. Moving away from, believing that everyone should believe the same thing, or that one group should believe the same thing, and more of, this is where I place myself as an individual. This is what gives me meaning. This is what gives me purpose. This is what makes me happy, and then went from there. I didn't kind of think, okay, I've now learned Buddhism and now I'm going to become a Buddhist. I have appreciation for Buddhist practices. The thing about meditation that I mentioned, the importance of me meditating, I gained an appreciation for meditation from studying Buddhism. I gained an appreciation for constantly questioning and wrestling with my beliefs from Dawkins and from Hitchens. I never got to the stage of like absolute, so this is what I absolutely believe. But this need to constantly question, to constantly evolve, to constantly question my environment, I brought up from that. And that's kind of where I place myself at the moment.
All right. Well, thank you very much for talking to me. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
No, it's great. Thank you very much. So if next time I am wrestling with God, I will call you again.
It doesn't have to be then. If it's just for a good cocktail recipe, you can also call me out too.
just like that. One of those.
Yeah, one of the two. Just those two.
Well, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Take care. Thank you.